Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in Nepal. Because Nepal, which is a country located close to India and China, is going through a revolution right now. And this is badged as being the first revolution organised by Gen Z. So that's basically people who are aged roughly between 13 and 28. And the one thing that Gen Z hate the most is if you take away their social media.
Violent protests erupted in Nepal after the government's decision to block access to Facebook, Instagram, and other social media platforms.
Police fired tear gas and rubber bullets at demonstrators who were storming parliament buildings. Organizers of the protests are calling them demonstrations by Gen Z, saying young people are frustrated by government corruption, a lack of economic opportunities, and a recent social media ban.
Thousands of young people outraged over a ban on social media apps like Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp, storming the Parliament of Nepal and setting it ablaze, defiantly waving artifacts looted from government buildings. The chaos forcing the Prime Minister to resign and shutting down the country's main international airport. Demonstrators demanding change, including an end to government corruption.
Now, obviously, I was being a little bit flippant, saying that these riots were actually caused by the closure of social media in Nepal. But that was actually the trigger point. People in Nepal are deeply unhappy at the moment. And the lack of access to social media, and therefore the lack of communication, being able to talk to other people and organise things, was what caused the chaos that's going on right now. Now, this is the first time that we've talked about Nepal, so I thought it was worth having a look at where it's located. As I said at the start of today's video, it's a landlocked country situated on the border between India and China. It's actually borders onto Tibet, which is sort of part of China. But you can see here where it's located. And the capital is Kathmandu, and that's where the problems have been going on. That's where the government is located, and that's where the Prime Minister was living before he had to resign as a result of all of these riots. Now, Nepal itself, I thought it was worth having a quick look at its population pyramid, because it's got a population of around about 30 million people. So it's quite a large country in terms of the number of people. But as you can see from this pyramid, it's actually now got a declining population. So up until around about 20 years ago, it had a perfect pyramid shape. But you can see that it's now tapering towards the bottom. So this means that there are less people being born, and so the population is now in decline. And there's a number of different reasons for that. The first is the falling fertility rate. As we've discussed before, for a country to have a constant population, it needs to have a fertility rate of 2.1. And the birth rate in Nepal is now down to 2.0. So that means that it's now declining. And this reflects greater access to education, better family planning, and changing social norms. So in the past, it was normal to have large families. Today, it's changing. People want smaller families. And one of the reasons why the population is declining right now is because people are leaving the country. Over 2 million Nepalese live and work abroad, mainly in India, the Gulf states, and Malaysia. And migration skews the working age population, especially amongst young men, but also increasingly amongst women. And this reduces the number of people residing in Nepal, even if they're counted in the population. And one of the key issues is the lifestyle change that's going on in Nepal, because with rising living costs in the city of Kathmandu and other cities across the country, couples are delaying or having fewer children. And younger generations are now aspiring to leave the country or focus on careers or reducing their family size. So people are looking for a better quality of life rather than having lots of children. And that's obviously causing a problem with regards to the population. In terms of what goes on in Nepal, well, it doesn't have a huge amount of natural resources. It's probably most famous for Mount Everest, the tallest mountain in the world. So obviously, if you're a climber, then you probably have aspirations to go to Nepal. I think 8 out of the highest 14 mountains in the Himalayas are located in Nepal. So it's fantastic if you're interested in climbing. It's also an interesting place to go as a tourist. It has lots of national parks. It has lots of animals and wildlife that you can go and visit. There are lots of temples. It's the birthplace of Buddha, reportedly. So as a tourist, I think it's a really attractive proposition if you're a climber, obviously. But in terms of what resources does it have, it doesn't have a great deal. And this chart shows the breakdown of employment in Nepal. And you can see that right at the top here is agriculture, farming. It represents 2/3 of all employment. And in terms of what Nepal is growing, it's rice, maize, wheat, millet, livestock feed, and most of the farms are small farms that are subsistence. So people are basically growing their own food and then eating it. That represents around 80% of all of the farming in Nepal. And when you have a situation like that, it generally tells you that the country is very poor. If people are literally growing their own food and eating it, then it tends to be a very low income economy. Services represent around 25% of employment, and that's the growing level of tourism. And there's also some trade and transport and some other service related industries. And in terms of actual industry itself, it's only around about 10% of all employment. Mostly construction, but there's also some small scale manufacturing. And Nepal actually does have a steel industry. Nepal has very close relations with India, as we'll go to look on in a moment. In terms of how it ranks globally for wealth, Nepal is a very poor country. This table lists selected countries and shows their GDP, their population, and then most importantly, GDP per capita. So how much is the country earning per person? So you can see that right at the top globally is Luxembourg. Now you might be thinking, Luxembourg, how are they the richest country in the world for GDP per capita? Well, Luxembourg is essentially an administrative capital in Europe. So there are lots of tax advantages for being in Luxembourg. It's a bit of a tax haven. And so lots of family offices and companies have headquarters there. Lots of administration goes on there. It's a good place to go to do wealth planning. And so the people who are living there are being paid very well. It's quite small. There's only 700,000 people living there. And so because of all of those factors, technically it's the richest country in the world per capita, but it's not really a proper country in the context of what we would talk about. It doesn't have any natural resources. It's literally just a lot of bureaucracy going on in Luxembourg. Switzerland is the second richest country in the world per capita. It's got an average of 94,300 earnings per head. Luxembourg's was 128,000. Now, I've just picked out a few other countries that I thought were worth talking about, mostly because it's where you live, the viewers on my channel. So I'm going to look after you. I'm going to tell you what's going on in your country. If more people want to see their country coming on this, then you need to persuade people to start watching the channel and get your country up the top. But the four biggest markets for me are the USA, the UK, Canada and Australia at the moment. We've also got Germany on the fringe of that. Oh, actually, whilst I'm on the topic of talking about the channel, please subscribe if you haven't done so already. I need to increase the subscriber numbers. I'm trying to get to that holy grail of 500,000, but also it helps me with the algorithm and just makes me feel a bit happier about life and also tells me that you're liking these sort of videos. So please subscribe if you haven't done so already. So the USA, which is my biggest market, is number 8 on the global list of GDP per capita, 85,400 on average. So if you live in the USA and you're earning less than 85,400, then you're bringing down the GDP per capita. No, I'm only joking. This is GDP, it's not earnings. Australia is number 11 on the list, average GDP per capita of 72,000. Canada, number 17, 65,000. The UK, 24 with 53,000. And then I picked out a couple of other countries that I thought were worth talking about. China and India, which are the two largest for population. China's number 65. So whilst it has high GDP, it's the second largest economy in the world. So it's got massive amounts of GDP, but it's also got a lot of people, 1.4 billion. So per capita, the GDP only comes in at 13,700, ranking it as number 65 on the global list. So there's 64 countries that have higher GDP per capita, but China has the second highest GDP in the world. India, well, its GDP is about 4 trillion, but it's also got 1.4 billion. So per capita, 2,800. So that ranks it as 143rd in the world. And there's only 190 countries that are listed on the GDP per capita list. So India is really low in terms of per capita, but in terms of the economy, it's the fifth largest economy in the world. And it's growing rapidly, but I don't think it's going to rise into the top 100 anytime soon. Now, we've got to Nepal here, and the point of showing this is really just to show how poor Nepal is. So, as a population of around about 30 million, the GDP is around 43 billion, and that means that per capita, we're looking at 1,400, ranking it as the 150th country on the list out of 190. So, there are only 39 countries that are worse off than Nepal. And I put a few of these on here. Ethiopia, they're 152nd. Afghanistan, they're 182nd. Only got $600 per capita as GDP. And Burundi is officially the poorest country in the world per capita. It's got 13 million people. It produces GDP of 4 billion. And that means that it's only $300 per person. So the takeaway here is that Nepal is a very poor country. And when you have poor countries, people tend to get upset if things start going badly. I wanted to talk about what it does in terms of an economy. So this is the top 10 exports for 2024. And you can see there's a real mix here. So animal fat, vegetables, oils, and waxes was the biggest single item. Now we'll look at the country breakdown in a minute, but the biggest relationship that Nepal has is with India. So a lot of these exports are going to India. That's 12%. Coffee, tea, and spices is 8%. Iron and steel, which stands out when you look at the rest of this list as being a bit strange because you think this looks like heavy industry. Well, the reason why there's an iron and steel industry in Nepal is because of its relationship with India. It actually imports a lot of pre-made iron and then finishes the product. So it's basically an industry that was set up a number of years ago. That's around 8%. We then got textile floor covering, carpets, basically 8%. Man-made fibers, wood and wood products, beverages, food industry, waste and animal fodder, clothing and accessories, and plastic articles. But you can see here that there isn't one major dominant industry, and also a lot of this stuff is relatively low value, and it's things where you've got the high input of labor, so low labor costs are an advantage. Now, in terms of where those exports are going, as I've just said, India is the biggest market. It's on the doorstep, obviously. It's close to India. 72% of all of the exports go to India. 11% go to the USA. And then we've got a whole host of smaller countries, Germany, Turkey, United Kingdom, France, Australia, Japan, Canada, Italy. But it's basically the economy is intrinsically linked to India. In terms of imports, well, as with most countries, it doesn't have its own fuel, so it's having to import energy products, and that's the biggest single category. 23% of all of the imports go on energy. Iron and steel, that relates to the iron and steel industry. I was saying that it imports iron and steel as raw material and then processes it and then exports it again. So that's sort of like for like with the export market. Machinery, 7%, electrical, electronic equipment, 6%, animal, vegetable fats, plastics, vehicles, cereals, precious metals, stones, and pharmaceutical products. So you can see here the biggest single outlay is energy. And in terms of where it is importing from, its biggest single trading partner is also India for imports, 63%, slightly less than for exports. China is number 2 on the list with around about 15%. And then we've got a load of other different countries, Indonesia, UAE, United States, Argentina, Australia, Ukraine, Malaysia, and Qatar. And the net position of the imports and exports is shown by the balance of trade. And that shows that Nepal is a net importer. You can see here on the right-hand side, the scale goes from 0 at the top to minus 150 billion at the bottom. This is in Nepalese currency. And you can see that it has had a negative balance of trade in every single one of the last 12 months. And if I was to expand this chart, it would go on for the previous history. So Nepal is a poor country. It's having to buy in all of its energy, and therefore It's spending more than it's earning, and that's a problem that creates poverty in the country. Now, in terms of what's going on, what are the problems in Nepal that have caused these riots? Obviously, the trigger point was the banning of social media, but that wasn't why people are rioting. They're not actually rioting because they can't go onto YouTube and watch me on videos. They're rioting because of fundamental issues in the economy. Now, one of the biggest issues that Nepal is facing is the level of youth unemployment. And as we saw from the video, it's the youth who are rioting here. They're the ones who are most affected by what's happening. It's estimated that between 20 and 25% of youth are unemployed in Nepal at the moment. That's amongst the highest in Southeast Asia, and that's what's been fueling the unrest. Overall employment is sitting at around about 11%. So jobs are not keeping pace with the growing workforce. But also, we've got, as well as unemployment, we've got underemployment. So people who are working aren't earning as much as they would like to because it's a very low wage economy. So the average monthly wages are somewhere between $150 and $200. That's per month. That's not per day. That is per month. So that tells you what's going on in the country. People who are working aren't being paid much, so they're not happy anyway. But then a lot of people can't even get those low paid jobs. So that's really a problem if you just don't have enough money to basically put food on the table for your family or have a decent standard of living. And the poverty rate in Nepal is around 20% below the national poverty line. So 20% of people, 1 in 5 people, are living below the poverty line. That basically means they haven't got enough food to be living on. So it's not a great situation if 1 out of 5 people are like that. And then, of course, the rest of the population aren't exactly super wealthy either. And Nepal is dependent on people who have left the country sending money back. So 27% of Nepal's GDP comes from remittances. So people working overseas sending some of their wages back to support their families. Nepal also ranks quite highly on corruption and nepotism. So it's 108th out of 180 countries on that list. And there is a lot of mistrust in terms of politics and what people are doing in positions of power. Because of that, there's been a lot of political instability. So it's had 13 different governments since 2008. And as we talked about at the beginning of today's video, the current prime minister, or the previous prime minister, has now resigned. And he's actually been a focal point of some of the riots. His house has been attacked. It's been set on fire. I think he and his wife have been attacked. So really quite a serious situation. Now, because of the political instability and the corruption, we've got some infrastructure gaps. So access to electricity is getting better, but it's still intermittent. And things like transport and internet are still variable in Nepal. We talked about the low GDP per capita. And also, I mentioned earlier that over 2 million Nepalese are working overseas. So what's going on right now? What is going to happen over the next month or so? Because as the PM has resigned, what's going to happen? Well, we've got a caretaker government in place. So his resignation was accepted. And there's a caretaker situation until a new prime minister is appointed. Now, Nepal's another country that has a president and a prime minister. So the president is still around. And so he will be appointing a new government. And that throws up a really interesting question, because if people are unhappy with the current political situation and they believe that there's a lot of corruption and they don't trust the politicians, then the existing president just appointing another prime minister probably doesn't solve the issue. You probably need more of a wholesale change to the way the country is structured. But obviously, that remains to be seen whether that will be happening. In terms of security, well, as you saw in the video, the army has been deployed. There are curfews in place, and things like the airport and key infrastructure are being secured by the army at the moment. The social media ban has been lifted, and there's an investigation going on, because the reason why that ban was put into place was that all of the social media platforms were told that they had to register with the government because they didn't want any dissemination of information. They believed that some of the social media was being used to spread incorrect rumors and fake news, those sorts of things. And the social media platforms hadn't complied with all of those regulations. So there'll be an investigation going on into that. But I think in terms of fundamentally, there is still a desire for reform in Nepal. The people aren't going to be happy with just the new prime minister being appointed. And so it will be interesting to see what happens over the next few weeks and months. But fundamentally, here, we've got a country that is poor. It doesn't have a lot of natural resources. Its main resource is its land and its people. So it's land that can grow food on it, and also it can attract in tourists because it's a beautiful place and there's lots of interesting things to do there. But that's not going to grow the GDP overnight. It takes quite a while for tourism to build up. And things like riots in the capital city aren't going to help encourage people to go to Nepal who've never been there before. So we've got a very difficult situation for anybody who's running Nepal to fix, because you can't fix poverty in a short space of time. It takes a huge amount of investment, and you need to work with other agencies and other countries to build your infrastructure, all those sorts of things. So that's not going to happen quickly. And I think what we've got here is a situation where the poor people in Nepal have just got sick and tired of being so poor and being mistreated. And I think the social media ban was the final straw that broke the camel's back, that really just pushed some of these people to say, we've had enough now. This just is too much. Let's go and protest. And then those protests obviously broke over into violence. And we've seen the Prime Minister resigning. And it'll be interesting to see whether or not we can get calm reinstated and if the people become happy, or if this just recurs at some point in the near future. But the overall summary of today's video is that once again, we are seeing unrest across the globe. This is being caused fundamentally by the poverty and also the corruption and the mismanagement in Nepal itself, which has forced Gen Z to come out and protest and basically say, we are very unhappy with the way this is being done. We don't want this country to continue operating like this. We want to see fundamental change. We want to see jobs for young people. We want to see equal opportunities, all of those sort of things. But that's going to be really difficult for somebody to deliver. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video. You found it useful, informative, and thought-provoking. That's why I'm making these videos. I want to talk to you about things that maybe you're not aware of, or just talk about different issues and really raise things to your attention. So hopefully you're enjoying that. If you are, then please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end. And thanks so much to everyone that's supporting me. If you bought me a coffee, sent me a YouTube super thanks, or most importantly, signed up as a YouTube member or a Patreon or a Buy Me a Coffee member, because that really gives me long-term support and motivation. Thank you for all of that, and here's something to put a smile on your face.